Vincent, greetings.
Greetings. Woo! Ich musste gerade Gates pitchen.
So we already have some people in the chat. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for everyone to arrive.
Meine Güte. Sorry, das hat Aline ist noch. Hi, as
so Vincent is having fun like always.
Yes.
He always has a good time, indeed.
Always has a good time. Yeah. Actually got my vaccination today. So sprechen wir eigentlich Deutsch, Englisch, Deutsch?
The panel is going to be in English today.
Oh, so yeah. Let's continue in English, chaps. So for everyone who hasn't got a vaccination yet, there are free spots in East Germany. Just take the train, come over here. Apparently, prioritization doesn't matter anymore.
I found amazing during the vaccination discussion. Everyone's always saying, "Okay, what did you get?" and how was your reaction? And hence my question: how was your reaction? I had Astra, and it knocked me out. I should have started with half a dose, probably.
Half a dose. I mean, it's like 2 hours. I had it for 2 hours, so probably maybe ask me tomorrow. But I was lucky to get the good stuff. BioNTech.
The good stuff, huh? Okay.
So the good stuff is probably a perspective that somebody else would share differently. I actually got Johnson & Johnson, and I prefer this much more than BioNTech simply because you only have to do it once. So you only have to suffer once. That's
probably true. That's for sure. But it wasn't suffering.
Well, wait for it. I heard the second time is actually the fun time.
The fun? Oh, really?
Yeah.
For the BioNTech, the second one is more intense. Yeah. For Astra, it's probably the first one.
Good to know.
Where are you based right now, Vincent?
I'm at the GP practice of my mother. So in Lage, in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern.
Oh. And Dorian, I've seen that room before. That sounds a bit naughty, but I have seen it before.
No, you haven't. It's like...
Yeah, this is basically my working office or home office in Wolfsburg. So for those of you who don't know yet, I'm actually still living in Wolfsburg. I know it's crazy as a startup founder, but you have to be special in some way, right?
You have to differentiate yourself any way possible.
Exactly. And living in Wolfsburg is much easier than everything else.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Let's give it a couple more seconds, maybe 1 more minute actually, and then I think we're ready to go. Some familiar faces in the chat. I'm expecting some good questions, or in the list of participants actually. But let's give it until 4 past, and then we're ready to go. Okay, or actually, might as well just hit it now, I suppose. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Let's get the show on the road. I have bad news and good news. I'll start with the bad news up front. We have sadly dropped one of our speakers today. Sebastian from the Unit Institute is feeling quite sick. We wish him all the best. He seemed to have caught the stomach flu. We will make do anyhow. I think with like Vincent and Dorian here, I think we have enough knowledge to feed us through days of discussion, which is great. Just a short intro.
Probably cover like 3 days before I even come to say words. So that should probably be fine for everyone.
Indeed. Just a short intro of myself. My name is Bijan. I work in the marketing and sales department at Intertek. We're a product and software development company based in Munich, Macedonia, and Serbia. We're a team of around 130 engineers specializing in custom software development, like web as well as mobile. And we actually cover quite an array of industries coming from both B2B and B2C market segments. Specifically, healthcare is a growing topic for us, and we're also extremely proud in this context to have Dorian with us, one of our partners, Medkit Doc. But let's get to the intro of you two in the call with me today, or in the chat with me today. Dorian Koch, ex-McKinsey, now founder and CEO of Medkit Doc. Vincent Zimmer, founder of Kiron Open Higher Education, partner at ICME Healthcare and SmartCare. I probably left a couple of important milestones out, but I'll hand the ball over to you, Dorian, first. Maybe a short introduction on where you came from, on what you're doing now with like Medkit Doc, and what makes it stand out, and then I'll go over to you, Vincent.
Sure, of course. So basically, you mentioned already current position CEO and founder of Medkit Doc. So what do we usually do? We provide the next level of remote medical consultation. What does it mean? We combine connected medical devices with the telecommunication or telemedicine that you see already today. And by combining medical devices with this phone call, you can basically double the capabilities compared to the classical telemedicine that you see nowadays in Creo or any other solutions. This basically enables much more digital consultation than it was possible before. What did I do before this? I actually worked at McKinsey, as you mentioned, mostly on digital topics. So basically buying startups, and I thought, well, I could probably found one of those myself, but actually the idea came more or less out of the need for our family. This is basically where the idea has grown. So it wasn't anyway based on the previous experience at McKinsey, but mostly on what we needed as a family. And this was basically where this was coming from. And before McKinsey, I worked at VW for connected devices, on connected cars, and originally studied computer science and business administration.
Quite the spectrum. Maybe just a short question there. How are you experiencing working with your brother?
Yeah, so it's a tough thing, not only because he's my brother, but because he's also a physician. So I still remember the first time we had the discussion about how what will be the biggest problem of our startup if we actually start a company. And his biggest issue of all of the possible issues was that we have too many customers. That was his biggest fear. And you see the biggest difference between, people from business and people that are like in the medical field. There's a really big divide that you have to cover. And I think working with my brother helped partly in it and partly didn't. So I would say overall, it's a great thing, but there's also some things we have to navigate that probably some others don't.
I hear that. In which case, I'll pass the ball over to you, Vincent. You also have a couple of interesting stations, Ada Health, coming from health tech. Then you moved on to ed tech. Now you're back in health tech, but also ed tech. How do you go forward, or how do you connect the dots looking backwards and forwards in this case?
I think it always starts, where you come from. So with the family. So I'm from Rostock originally, 4 generations of a medical family. And in fact, I'm sitting in the GP practice right now. So I'm the black sheep, the first one who did something else. And I started my own med tech company when I was 18. I spent 5 years abroad, lucky time before the internet, so you wouldn't find that much stuff of it online. But I was, I think, always driven by this desire, that is my whole family, to actually help people. But, a doctor, he doesn't hold your hand and, give you nice words. He actually tries to solve a problem for you. And this approach, of actually trying to help, no matter if you're liked for what you do or if it hurts maybe a little bit, but and also accepting that there's trial and error, I think it's a pretty good, exercise before you go into entrepreneurship and building up things. I did that 7 times. I moved on after ADA, because I realized maybe the time has come to pass on the knowledge, and started investing myself, investing with a small, with a small fund, and then was caught up by ICME, who is around like for 65 years already, basically building, financing, and leading hospitals, to build up a fund of 500 million with predominant focus on the hospital sector. And what interests me most nowadays is this spark and this interception of not, an idea and a great people to do something new, not innovation itself, but how do you make innovations big? How do you scale things, beyond the first clients, beyond maybe 100 people and so on. That's how I met Dorian, actually, because he had showed all the ingredients of a great founder and a great idea that actually has the potential to go beyond. And to be fairly honest, there are not so many great ideas out there. I looked at basically everything in Germany, digital health wise, and maybe 5% is good. And there are a couple of mistakes people do. They don't realize that are mistakes because they haven't been on the journey. I haven't been on the journey a couple of times, which also actually embarked my first encounter with Intertech. I think we'll speak about this a little bit further down the line for people who are interested in it. because I think all of us want the world to be a better place and really make a difference. And then, it really sucks if you put a lot of heart into it, a lot of work into it, and then you make just strategic mistakes in the very beginning that will lead to nothing in the end. And I think that's why it's important to share this knowledge, to be on such panels like today. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Super kind words. Thank you very much. I think we all share that sentiment. Your last sentence actually brings me on to my next question, which actually leads us also into the next sort of part of this panel, which is like the industry itself in Germany on like a meta level. You mentioned mistakes and you mentioned bad ideas. Do you think this is due to the rather large entry barriers into the market, or is it really the fact that we Germans, or I would have to say Europeans, haven't understood design thinking properly? This question goes to both of you.
Florian, would you like to start?
Oh, that's totally unusual. No, just for the panelists who don't know, Vincent knows actually quite a bit, and we're always joking a bit that Vincent usually talks much more than I do, and I think that's actually quite a good thing. So we that works normally out very well in most of the meetings. But kidding aside, first of all, Vincent, thank you so much for your very kind words. I really appreciate it. And maybe getting back to the question. So I think for the German conservatism, let's call that, is quite famous, or the German Angst. And I think that's probably part of it. At least that would be my take on it. And if you look at most of the regulations that we are facing as founders, especially in the healthcare area, it's obvious that I think if you want to start a company in healthcare, you would probably go for a different country if you have the free reign to choose, right? If you're not connected to doing this for emotional reasons or for moral reasons, or because you want to do something for the country, then obviously there's some things that will be easier if you do the same thing in a different country. So I think that's part of it. But generally in the other areas, you can see that there are a lot of innovations going on. And so I think it's not 100% the explanations, but probably Vincent has even better insight into it. So I personally can only say we did this, we started into this even very typically German. We started from a product. So basically we built it because we needed it for our family, as I mentioned it in the beginning. And this is, I think, the very typical German way. So you build something in your basement, you create it, and then you have to basically see what you're doing with it. And this is how it happened for us. So I can say I'm the very typical example of a German founder who's now basically working on increasing the let's say, bring it to the market and fight the regulation and actually make it use of it.
Maybe just a complementary question, if it goes over to you, Vincent, because you mentioned conservatism, Dorian. I think it's an important aspect, especially when it comes to funding and investments. I would just like to add in brackets, how was this a couple of years ago, and if you see any change in the market today as a complementary.
Well, so maybe getting more stupid
and getting more like risky, actually, as you're saying.
No, simply more stupid. So
to elaborate.
To elaborate, I mean, one disconnect is if you're living with a family of doctors, and you're looking at digital health solutions, and you spend 5 minutes at our coffee table, you will realize quickly soon that majority of innovations or like upcoming startups is being pushed, fail the test the moment you speak to a doctor or the moment you speak to a patient. And I think there's a lot of stuff out there that is coming from both sides with a problem, either being built without doctors and patients in mind, without people actually, you intend to use whatever comes into new as an innovation, and then looks good on paper, sounds good in concept, in theory, but never works in practice. On the other hand, it's also the same problem is, I really love this project when a doctor develops something in a small GP, from the praxis, but then they lack the ability to understand it's not about their single practice. It doesn't, what works there works everywhere, and they have really a lack of abstraction to say, how would this work in 1,000 GP practices? Yeah, it works in Munich. Does it work in East Germany in the countryside? Does it work in Berlin when the patients, speak 40 different languages, and so on and so on? And so you have really these problems coming from both sides. There are a lot of things that are being built or being worked on probably will never have a real chance of ever getting anything done or really having a step forward for our healthcare system, because they, from the beginning on, they have these flaws. And what happened back then was that people were giving too little funding, insurance companies, everyone was very reluctant. And then you could criticize that. But on the other hand, I also think, the ideas were crappy. And then, but then it's a chicken egg problem, And if you don't give money and attention to this thing to help the people realize that and learn from the mistake and then come up with something better and improve and iterate, you will be stuck with the crappy ideas, What happened now is that everyone got more open, Jens Spahn really pushing a digital agenda for healthcare in Germany. TK, for example, our Techniker Krankenkasse from the insurance side, really, pushing everything forward. So much more money coming also from the VC side. But did the ideas really improve that much? Did we really had founders who really understand the healthcare system, really had, the learning journeys and then took it all together to make something new? Very, very rarely. So what happens then is that a lot of money then going still into projects that, from my perspective, will never have a chance to work out. Give you one example, comparing to MedGuideDoc, right? You have the largest healthcare fund that was just announced, 300 million going into CRU. CRU is a platform, that is essentially a nice idea on paper, like telemedicine, but it is essentially not working for years. Neither doctors are signing doctors up like crazy. Neither are patients using it like crazy. Neither have they provided us with a long-term model how this will be integrated into the healthcare system and the provision really into the workflow of doctors on every single day, nor into the reimbursement systems at all. And, I'm not criticizing anyone making particular decisions there. I'm just observing from the outside. If I compare that, with MedGuideDoc, like, a fraction of the funding, but, a consistent model from the beginning on, then you could really, then it's very easy to spot the differences, And I think
for CRU, you don't think that time and additional pressure will force insurances to kind of accept and reimburse?
It's all about timing.
And move forward then.
If the bubble collapses before we have had a breakthrough, it will fire back, because 300 million, it takes a while to spend that money. But at a certain point, people will ask, what's the point, And I think we could all agree on at the times of Zoom and Google Hangouts, we don't, the technology of connecting people via video chat is not the miracle, Like telehealth consultation in itself, yes, you can speak to people in different places. The realization, if you see someone digital, it's harder to tell what's wrong with that person, but certain things you can tell. Also, that's a realization. Yes, we have learned that now. So what's the point? What is the real innovation? What is the extra they do? And then if you don't spend that money then on something that is really helping our people, it goes beyond what the normal tools are, there will be no survival for you. And I think that is probably the hardest part, because that is not sexy. It's also not easy to be explained, neither to investors nor to doctors. And also something that is maybe a little bit forgotten there. It's about the cultural change. It's about the transformation process. It's about the change process. Just consider how much money we spent on changing the coal industry and the industrial area of North Rhine-Westphalia. Billions, of taking industry workers into new jobs and so on. Are we spending the same amount of money of, convincing doctors, convincing nurses to actually, work differently, and that it is something about to change? No, we don't. So is this the job of the, the single innovators? No, it isn't, but will it work without that effort? I highly doubt it. Sorry, what would too long answers for short questions?
No, I would actually, just a last question for you, Vincent, then I'll hand over to you, Doreen. What would be your concrete tips to make this happen? How could you incentivize adoption?
I would argue, let's be a little bit more German, I mean, there are certain stereotypes about Germany and about bureaucracy and the plan. But I wonder myself, we have been once famous for being engineers and thinkers, like having a plan and following it and sticking to the rules and so on. And I just wonder, but our plans are shitty and our execution is shitty, And what I can't really hardly accept, and it gives me conscious, is like, why can't we come up with better plans? Like look at DiGA, they launched a huge program without, detailing the quality criteria. Yes, it's a political, negotiation process. Yes, it is, a lot of questions to be answered. So what? Probably, Dorian, when you developed the electric car, brought the internet into the car, there were also a lot of questions, So work through it, come up with good ideas, and then execute them well. And what I see over and over and over again, so I don't have that one single idea that will all save us, except like, let's apply principles, let's have good plans. If they don't work, improve, and let's execute them in a very well done way. And that means, for example, for the electronic patient record or the electric, ordering of the e-receipt, for example, that shouldn't take 10 years, that shouldn't take 10 years. And it shouldn't be like super complicated and a user experience that is from the 90s. That is just, I don't care for each detail of this, but it's obvious for everyone to see that it wasn't a good plan and it wasn't well executed.
I'll have to hold you there, Vince, because you mentioned DiGA, which is actually our next question, but I would rather hear Dorian first on the same topic.
Okay, so basically the question is, why do you think the innovation is basically lacking, or the execution is lacking? And I think the execution and innovation is lacking probably because of the same thing, missing talent in this workspace. So if you're thinking about this, if you're really thinking about this, if you want to be talented, where do you go? In an American society, you go at a Harvard Business School or Stanford, and you try to be a founder or consultant in finance, and you see that's where the talent goes in the end. And in Germany, if you're really talented, you go into basically engineering school, or like 10 years ago, you went into banking maybe, or 20 years ago, but you never went into founding. And funding a company, or actually working on the regulation. No, you don't simply go and say, okay, my biggest dream is now to work in improving regulation or whatever. So you basically have this issue. If you don't make this really attractive for new upcoming talent, you will never improve this process. And I think that's the main reason why you have a lack of execution and innovation style at the same time, because you're missing the talent at the right places.
So talent would be your main point.
Yeah, I think if you really think about what's coming out of the universities nowadays, how can you bring the people into certain areas that they execute and innovate in things that we realize, and also help on the other side the government to actually make something useful out of the regulation? Because I think we will never be in a position where we are as good or unregulated as in the US, but that's also not our strengths. Our strengths is, as Vincent mentioned, to have something very well executed, but we need people that define the execution really well. So the question is, how do we bring people there?
On the question of investment, Dorian, what was your experience? Was there a reluctance? Was there a question? Has it been done in the US or like somewhere else on the planet? Was it a difficult process, or was it like met with, oh yeah, let's do it?
So if you think about the original idea, maybe to just come back to this, is we actually didn't want to get funding, right? So I would never probably have started this idea with the idea, hey, let's do a whiteboard session, brainstorm what is the best thing we want to do, and then get money for it. But the idea was rather we wanted to do something, in this case for my grandmother, for my wife, who were chronically sick. So we wanted to simply improve, because we saw the issue with telemedicine without connected medical devices. We saw that simply my brother couldn't treat our family right. So we started inventing basically and integrating MedKits into the video consultation call. That was basically the start. So the question of funding wasn't like immediately important for us in the beginning. We just used our own money to build it. And then after building the first step, we realized that it was way before the pandemic, right? So it was like 2018 or so where we started working on this. We said, I think in Germany, the funding is so difficult, let's bootstrap anyway, and you don't have waste so much time on fundraising, you actually invest time into the product. So my experience in the beginning was, let's not even try this because it makes more sense to actually do it yourself and don't invest the money into it. And then after, or the time into raising money, and then after the Corona pandemic, that's where we thought, if we don't raise money now, we basically waste the time to go to market, and instead just be the typical German thing. We work on our product all the time, but then are too late to the market. And that's where we really started fundraising. So for us, it was a combination of really good timing and actually already existing product and the existing plan on how to go to market, that we just accelerated them with fundraising activities. And I think that was why for us, fundraising was comparatively easy compared to what I've seen in other for other founders, but it was basically also We were just a very good coincidence in the right time, right place, right product.
Just a short interlude for the participants as well. There will be a Q&A session at the end. There's a lot of information going around from Vincent and Dorian, but there is going to be time at the end to ask questions. Thank you for mentioning that, Dorian. This actually brings me on to the next topic, MVP development. How did you go about initiating the initial product? Maybe also for entrepreneurs to be listening at the moment, how would you go about building a first demo, an MVP, and then scaling it through also like a funding phase where it's uncertain where it may go?
Yeah. So how do you build a first product? So I personally really like paper wireframing. So that's my thing. So I really just start writing stuff on a piece of paper and just scribbling it and actually click with my fingers on it and just try to move where I want to go and check with everyone before doing anything in specific meetings if that's actually the case. But this normally works if you have already a clue what you want to do, right? If you want to do user research first, and if you're building all of that, then there are probably much better processes like design thinking and everything is described on the web. But I can just say, if you really want to do something, a problem that you have that you want to solve, and use that as a starting point, and then start with paper wireframing and just imagine the way how this process would go, and then actually talk to everyone that you have involved into that. So for basically, I did most of that with my brother, who is a physician, right? Then you actually get results that make sense. But don't try and do this with 3 MBA people that studied business administration in one room and try to brainstorm it. That will certainly be a problem.
How would you go about it? Like Vincent, you've also been involved in many projects. One of them is Curon. Then like the last one that I know of is SmartCare, where we were also involved. How do you see that? I think you're muted.
Muted.
No call without that, right?
Let's use the example of Curon. So when we launched Curon, which is a university for refugees, so basically a learning platform, we basically launched on the 15th of October, and on the 1st of October I asked my CTO, so how far are we with the platform? He's ready. I said, yes, can you show me? Yeah, it's ready in my head. I was like, okay, panicking a little bit. So I learned very early on, that you have to have a certain separation of work, and you need to trust the people in charge of the technology to be in charge of the technology. I think we changed our platform over the course of 5 years, maybe 11 times completely, like the backend, the front end, the purpose of the platform, what it should do, what type of users are on it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is quite usual. I do think also it has been coming as a shock sometimes for us, for our own mistakes we did in the beginning. And the two I feel are always coming up that you underestimate is the one everyone knows, we're going to change the product anyway, it's going to be developed while we go, but you underestimate what that means. That means probably you have to do a work for 3 people now, and then in the future you think, when we do the same work again, to build something again, we need 3 people. But actually to change something that exists and change it is more time. It takes then 6 people. And this is one mistake. And the other one mistake is that we were too much bound by our first clients and partners, and too much bound by our own internal beliefs. And that's why I ultimately think I recommend to everyone basically working with external support on technology development for these 2 reasons. The first partners coming on board, they're important to you. You're building something that's new. The first people will give you money, and then they have requests and they have wishes. And because you're building something new or co-develop it somehow, you don't have a very clear opinion sometimes, or not very clear limitation of what are you willing to change for them and do for them. The problem with that is the platforms almost automatically get extremely more complex and complicated and are not scaling in the end. And this is what happened to healthcare basically all over again. That's why you go into a hospital and you have like 50 different IT systems. That's why like even the largest providers for software in the healthcare industry, they have like 25 different subsystems, because they also customize that. And they made this mistake very much in the beginning. And once you're going down that road, once you start customizing, and once making this journey, it's very hard to ever go back. The second mistake is, and this is maybe probably something that comes more from companies like Ada, And I'm not using the example of Ada here, but technology-driven companies have very strong USP or value composition and think very highly because it took a very long time of developing a product with a particular good outcome. Then of course the technology people think, oh, we figured it out at all, and it's really they have this track record that makes it super hard for the people in charge to think outside the box and think, do we really need that, And just to give you one example, we had once a partnership with an insurance company that almost broke because the frame of a logo that should be included in the partnership was not considered by our by the frame that was given by our product people with the frame that was given by the other product people by 2 not millimeters is what is smaller than millimeters, by I don't know 200 pixels or whatever it was, and I was standing in the middle and realizing how ridiculous it was. On the other hand, for both of them it made total sense, because you can't always change to every small request coming from the outside. But if you are, only working on your own, and you have to make, these belief systems have to make sense internally and are not being challenged until it is too late to change them without much cost. So I think that's why it took me very long to realize that. That's why I think you have a lot more pain when you don't have everything internally. If you have competencies and there's always a pain somehow. The communication is much more effort, etc., etc. But I think you will be better off on the longer one. You will ultimately be building better products, and you will be saving a lot of time and effort further down the line.
So just to sum up, Vincent, if I heard it correctly, you are advocating the use of external partners when it comes to building your product, which is I'm actually shocked that you say that and honored at the same time because we've worked together clearly. But in Germany, it seems, if you want to call it outsourcing, nearshoring has sort of a negative ring to it. It's sort of like the affair that no one's really proud of.
It had for me as well, and it has to do with this various reach out people writing me on LinkedIn. Hey, we are in Ukraine, want to do 30% less. That is not very trust assuring, to be honest, right? So it took me a while also to realize that. But ultimately, looking back, I probably wasted a couple of millions across the different ventures on these problems, that I created myself.
How did you pick a good one? Just for everybody out here.
Like, how do you pick any partner? You get to know them, you start working, you're building trust, you're building networks, and then you stick with them once, and you're not the first person doing it. So that's why I'm not advocating for a particular partner, right? So probably there is, I don't know, I don't even know if the majority of these external service providers are good or if the majority is crap. I don't even know because
Okay, I know. Don't worry about Vincent. Majority of them are crap.
Majority of them is crap. So yeah, market need, but I think ultimately investors will realize it's the same as founders will realize. And it is also, like you said, it's also a talent question, For certain aspects, let's look at big data analysis and AI. I mean, most of these claims what it could do are bullshit. Most of the people working out there are not as expert as it seems. Nevertheless, you certainly at certain points to get certain things done, you need this expert knowledge. Is it reasonable for a very small team in a very early on beginning to get a super sophisticated AI expert, as a 6-team member or something? That sounds good on the investor pitch, but actually it's not necessary, So, and maybe you there's 5 startups wanting this AI expert, but there's only one expert, So I also think as a sheer limitation of talent in the market, we will have to find concepts how to share that expertise. I think, for example, with chief medicals, or there's a very limited number of medical doctors who are willing to go into digital solutions, who are understanding digital solutions, not advertising just then out of sheer motivation, but really truly, bringing both worlds together. And I have seen all these people who I admire who are doing this working on various projects. Why? Because there are so few of them and they're needed everywhere, right? So this is in a smaller case. And I think there you have this quality reassurance that you're saying if someone who went to med school in Germany, they have a certain level of trustworthiness. And I think we have to have similar pathways in tech development as well.
Okay. How do you see it, Dorian? I mean, you obviously also developed your MVP using a partner, you're now back in a marriage for good or for bad. Do you see any value in it?
Yeah, of course I do. The only question is, how do you partner with whom at what stage? So that is for me the most important question, because, for example, in the beginning, I started developing it based on, I thought I study computer science, so let's do it on my own. But the simple truth is it just takes you way too much time that you could spend otherwise on something that only you as a founder can do. And even if you have the qualification to do it, and to be honest, I obviously, after working at VW as an IT project manager, then spending time at McKinsey for 3 years, you're not the best programmer anymore. That's obvious. So it makes much more sense to use a partner to start the process. But what I really learned is there's not like what I said 2 minutes ago, there are a lot of shitty ones out there. The reason is not per se that they as a person are bad or that the company is bad, but oftentimes they simply don't fit your stage. So there are companies that are really good in my early stage, where personally I just had a very limited amount of money that I needed somehow to outsource the actual programming. But it's a totally different stage if you then get at one stage an investor in and you have 7 figures budget, and it doesn't. The most important thing is actually how fast do you get to the market and do you reach a certain certification and so on. So that is simply not the same skill set that you're looking for in a partner, and it really depends what you want to do, and then look out at who you want to partner with. And unfortunately, the 5 stars on Upwork don't tell you that story. So you have still to do a lot of your work and doing the reviews and due diligence on your own.
Agreed with the both of you. We're at minute 36. We planned the Q&A to be from minute 40 or 45, which actually leaves room for one more important question, which I think
I would say let's open up for discussion. No, if there are questions, I think it's always the best for the audience to get engaged.
If there are already questions, then happy to do that. Otherwise, I would have one more kind of pressing topic that I would like to pose to both of you, which is DiGA. A report came out today. Okay, just one, Vincent. I know it's not your favorite topic, but it needs to be covered. A report came out today by Cherry Ventures and Gründer Atelier, which you also know very well, Vincent, that the current DiGA process has clear gaps in efficiency. One of them is the one that you mentioned already, which is the quality, which is actually define value for patients. And one thing that they actually highlight in the report is that the companies don't have a unilateral, their offerings don't have a standardized pricing, which means they're able to mark up around 400 to 800% at this moment in time, which is obviously extremely problematic. Just to add some broader context, how do you both feel about the process? Do you think it's justified? Do you think it's well set up? Where do you see it go? Or do you want it to end? Or can it even be done like that? You can go first, Vincent, so you don't have to wait and get more angry.
No, I'm not
waiting for the question.
I'm not angry. DiGA is a very difficult question because for one sake, it was important. Don't forget where we have been working with before DiGA. But what happened? What was there before DiGA? There was this Innovationsfonds, basically, right? Where you give a lot of pile of money. They say, oh, if you team up with an insurance company, you actually have this protected room where you can try out things and it's getting funded. And afterward, there's a clear pathway into the Regelversorgung, right? And this still exists. This is continuously being executed and done. So without going into much detail, I feel like there hasn't been enough thought coming into why has that approach actually failed and what needs to be different this time to do it right, And so so what I really celebrate is the success of getting something like that done nevertheless. The signal sense, that you can now have digital solutions subscribed by a doctor. But I feel like, it's designed by people who actually know the healthcare system. So they actually known from the beginning on why it wouldn't work out the way people hoped for. And what I feel a little bit sorry for is the people who putting a lot of hopes into it and, being maybe a little bit misled by the actual potential it has, and it's same like the big funding, it created optimism and enthusiasm, which is good. But it will, if it doesn't work, then out. What will investors do? Everyone who has been told, oh, I need to be on a DiGA, and then everything will be fine. The moment they realize that this is not the case, a lot of things people will have to answer a lot of tough questions.
And add something there, Vincent, maybe there's currently 9 companies under DiGA certification, 4 of them pending.
Yeah, and are these 9 companies now making a lot of money, and are they being used now by patients going to the roof? And if that's not the case, so what is a pity here? That there are just 9 out of 400 on this list, or that this DiGA thing is not doing for these 9 startups what it is supposed, or what was promised sometimes in the underlying, that this is the pathway in German healthcare, And then, what is the learning there? Is the learning that we choose the wrong 9 solutions because they actually don't solving problems that are worth being solving? Because that would be one explanation, or is the infrastructure wrong? And then I think I don't want to be the one, ruining the party already now. I think we are still, the excitement is not as high as it was in the beginning, but it hasn't flipped yet. But I think, let's say, at least in the last 12 months, there will be a point where these questions have to be answered. And I'm very happy I'm not the one who needs to answer them. Very happy.
How about you, Dorian?
So probably for DiGA, it counts like for most interesting innovations, there's always this Gartner hype cycle, right? And I think there was a part where everyone thought this will be the Hail Mary that will save it all. But I totally, and now there's at some point in time, there will be a gap that we have to go through, and then we'll see what actually the plateau looks like. But I have totally to agree with Vincent. I think like not only internationally, but also to investors and also to founders, it's a great sign that we wanted to do this now. And basically the first step of getting rid of the fax machines in the GP offices that still exist there, and at least giving the message is already really important. But coming back to your original question, like this markup of 400 to 800%, I think if you really look at what Vincent said, I totally have to agree with that. Even if you have this markup of 400 or 800%, the question is, how many do you profit of that? And if this is really a significant amount that you're spending. And I would offer the perspective and maybe suggest an analysis of how much time and money was actually invested in creating the regulation on DiGA, B, on how much was spent in technology and lawyering fees into approving the regulations, and then actually doing all of that, and how much did you then spend too much on investing into basically these solutions? And my guess would be that actually spending so much on the basically setting up the whole process is still much higher than the markup that's now too high. So I would rather go into the risk of paying a couple of markups in the beginning than actually now scaling back and find a new rule why you shouldn't invest or shouldn't reimburse it.
Okay.
And by the way, we are not applying for DiGA at the moment, so it's not a self-centered saying, just to be honest about that. So we are not applying any markups to anything. It's just like, if you put it in perspective, I really think we should be more freely with investing money into people that deliver some kind of solution rather than just finding reasons why not to.
And maybe to round that up, we're also in the very early stages of this process, and I think we will do well in innovating it. We do have a question from the panel on this topic, which is rather broad. I don't know if we can get into it now. What kind of standards are necessary for compliance if you're registering like medical software? We would I would recommend that we direct this person to the DiGA website. There's a couple of standards, including legal requirements, standalone software classification, MDD and MDR. There are a couple of things to consider. I hope this answered.
I actually can simply recommend probably 2 books that are very helpful. One is DiGA Vade Medicum, I think it's called, and the second one is Software as a Medical Device. And if you're finished with both of them and you still want to do it, then feel free to call me.
Maybe you can add your number into the chat afterwards, Dorian.
I'm pretty confident that the second book kills it.
It's a tease and then a shutdown.
Exactly.
Any other questions from the panel? I would open up at this point. Thank you very much, guys. Maybe as a concluding question from the both of you, as on entrepreneurs and founders, what are your three, and this is very, very broad, but I think it still has like merit. What are your three main tips as a founder that you would pass on to our hosts, not host, but to the audience today?
So since probably Vincent is, as always, the much more positive guy, and ending on a very, very positive note is always the best thing. Maybe I go with the three things that you probably shouldn't do, and then Vincent can probably innovate with the things that are very broad and very nice. So I would say let's maybe start answering the question by what you shouldn't do. Is I think one thing that I mentioned before was I wouldn't go personally into the healthcare space if the only reason why you founding is just to be a founder, or just because you want to be rich. Then I would definitely not go into the healthcare space. There are probably much easier things to get done than a healthcare innovation. I think what you really should be aiming for, do it if you have a unique, basically, so that would be tip one, and doing it would be tip two. If you have a unique team or a unique idea or a unique setup that somehow differentiates you from your peers, that really you think you bring some value to the healthcare market, and you are able and willing to push through all the things that don't bring you joy. I mean, nobody is going into the healthcare because they want to comply with rules, but there are obviously good reasons for them. But you need to have the strength to go through them. And I think that's probably number two. You need to be ready to deal with that, and you can only do this if you're doing this out of real passion for solving it. And basically, the third thing is why you shouldn't do it. Don't do it for the big market. So that's also probably something that I've heard a lot of founders asking me. Oh, the healthcare market is so big, growing, and there are old people. So let's do this. Actually, I think the market looks big, and there is a lot of things to do, but it's much harder. The entry barriers are so much harder than everywhere else that if you're looking for a big market, it's easier to look somewhere else. So those would be my three things where I say, don't do it, but only do it if you have a big passion or a big setup.
Thank you very much. And on to the positive, Vincent. Be as inspiring as possible, please.
Did I come across as the positive guy today? Okay. I think my recommendation.
Always a question on how do you compare it to Vincent?
I think my recommendation is do what you love. And then again, think about what you want to do. So make a plan and execute that well. Because it doesn't matter in which industry you go. I think there's always obstacles. There's always, so healthcare is not particularly different from education or from a financial industry. You always have regulations, you have always conservatism, there's always, existing stakeholders. And I've worked in different industries, and there is a lot of similarities, actually, to be fairly honest. And the people who thrive as doctors, as innovators, as people who are entrepreneurs in large healthcare organizations trying to foster change from within, everyone who have come across worked on a agenda of intrinsic motivation and with a true motivation to make a difference wherever that might originate from. And the people who are actually then more than just dreamers, more just a willingness to help, they have a good plan and they execute it well. So I think these are the three, and this is something you can learn. The first one you have to find in yourself, and the second the two other things, they're not that hard. Go out and learn about it. If you're a doctor, learn about management tools. If you're management, get some basic medical knowledge. How are patients actually being treated? How does a diagnosing process actually look like? How does therapy actually work? It takes 5 years to become a doctor. You have to get a basic understanding. It's actually not that hard, and this is what I highly recommend.
And then actually getting the people together to actually do this, because in the end, I think most of the founder teams work from strengths-based. So you have one guy that is doing the medical thing really good, another guy that is doing the moping really good and being the tech guy that destroys the dreams of the doctors, right? And then you have a third guy who's the enthusiastic one and actually willing to sell it really hard. So I think there's probably a good mix of getting the understanding and then getting the great team together.
Being as close to the market as possible is what I heard. from the both of you, sort of.
Dorian, there's a question particular to you. Why do you do it?
Why do you do it, Dorian?
Maybe that's the last question.
Well, exactly what exactly that is referring to, but I'm assuming it's something that you said.
No, but why is he doing what you do with MedKitDoc? No.
Yeah,
if that is the question.
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned in the beginning, I did bootstrap the whole idea because I saw a real pain in the family when you actually saw how my brother tried to treat our family members. He is living like 300 kilometers away from us. And when there was a real issue with chronic diseases, especially with my grandmother, you saw that you could have had an easy solution, like just him listening with the stethoscope to her would have solved a lot of issues and a lot of pain when she tried to get out of the apartment and into the GP's office. But you couldn't do it because simply no solution existed on the market. And we just basically saw that's a very, like technical wise, very easy thing to fix, but it didn't exist, right? So, and I just couldn't stand this issue because it was so obvious to me that it needed to be solved. That was the main reason for me to start the innovation, and then let's start the development. And then the second thing is, why did we start a company out of it? Because at some point we realized that it's not just only us that is having this issue, but there's a broad areas of people or broad society issue that we can solve with that. And obviously it's something that we couldn't basically let go, right? So for us, it's something that even though we had great careers, him as a physician, I working as at McKinsey, we just wanted to get it done. So on the weekend, every time we started talking about it again and again, and we just noticed we just didn't want to let it go. And there was only two options: either do it full time or let it go full time. And since we didn't were able to not let it go full time, we decided to do it full time.
We have a direct comment from Dennis Wagner. Dorian, I agree with you. If you build a startup in healthcare, you should do it because of the passion and value for society and not the money. And we also have a question beforehand that you managed to respond to in written form, Vincent, which was, I'll read it out just one more time because I think it's interesting and amusing. How do you put your certified software as a medical device on the EU market from a company coming from the Balkans?
Yeah, I sent him an answer that actually with the particular regulation. So I think the one thing to consider is it is actually not that hard. So the reason that stops you from a Balkan to launch into the German market is not the regulation. You can actually look it up, follow it through, and you will, get your certified, whatever. What will stop you from the Balkans, to be honest, is the cultural backslash that is in Germany and any other healthcare market particularly strong, because doctors are gatekeepers. They're not particularly fond of English-speaking international actors coming in. They're not particular from, maybe not so many resentments against the Balkans, but a lot against the US players or whatever kind. But the same,
there's definitely some prejudice for sure.
Yeah. So I think don't see Germany as an easy market just because it's the largest one. It is really more the culture and the language barrier that will keep you on your toes rather than the software or the legislation side.
But I think I need to add that it's not only because you're English speaking or from outside, even if you're a German speaking guy who's basically grown up with a physician, I think still, if you're not a physician and you're talking to physicians about anything that's related to medicine, you will have a big issue on your hand, right? So I think what I realized, or what we realized during the time, is you need for basically to talk to physicians, you need to have a physician on your team that's really good. Otherwise, you're going to have issues talking to other participants in the healthcare space. So I think it's probably there's some truth to what Vincent said as well. But really, I think the physicians are, for obvious reasons, a tight-knit community, and I think that's something that you need to consider as well.
We have a question that you answered again, Vincent, quite quickly. You're an absolute machine. What is the most important thing that software companies need to learn to be better in developing the medical software? Is it all standardization and compliance? If I understood the question correctly, it's asking if the compliance and standardization part is the most important aspect of it. I think this has been answered indirectly by by the two of you. It is actually understanding the market first, and then adhering to the compliance model. You answered, like Vincent, understand the base of medicine and the culture and framework in which it takes place. I think that's basically summing it up. Okay, do we have another question? 5 minutes left.
So maybe just I maybe add one additional wisdom from my side on how to what did I realize when we switched from developing in a classical way to actually developing medical software. I think one of the biggest things you need to keep in mind is that if you do this, it takes definitely much longer than you expect. So whenever somebody tells you this would take a day in normal development time, then whatever you think it will actually take, it will probably take more. If you're starting the process, right? You get better over time and understanding what it actually does make it take longer time and how to optimize and so on. But if you're starting basically and you have to learn all these processes, I think you can't underestimate the value of people who have done this specific thing before, and to see how you can basically comply with the rules while at the same time still developing great software. So it's not so much about getting the best software developer, but actually getting the best people understanding what is it you need to do for creating a medical software. So probably even if you just try to create a calculator as a medical software in the beginning, it will take you a lot of time if you don't have this knowledge.
We have another question. Where do you see the biggest gap for SAMD between directives and regulation? I'm not exactly sure what is meant by that. Do you guys know? Can you see the question?
SAMD probably means software development for medical services.
Software as a medical device, yeah.
So where do you see the biggest gap between the gap for software development between directives and regulation? Not sure what's meant by directives here.
I think regulations is, for example, what is reimbursable, right, which is DIGA, and directives is, for example, what counts as a medical device, right? For example, you can dodge the bullet if you, for example, claim your software solution is basically a GP software management tool, right? So that wouldn't count, or that wouldn't be needed to certify it as a medical product. And could use patient data and be used by doctors. But then in the same way, it's contradicting, because then it wouldn't be reimbursable and doctors would have to pay out of pocket for it. So, and then, you know, in this way, you are somehow leaving loopholes, you know, for people who want to go fast to the market. But then, you know, it wouldn't make sense. Why, for example, if you compare it then with electronic patient record, you know, where patient information being stored and patient and doctors interacting, what exactly is the difference to a GP software practice, you know, where also the information is stored and the people are interacting and they, you know, agreeing on certain dates, they filing in the diagnosis and so on. And I think this is, I mean, there are reasons for that, of course, but it's similar to the IT system, where I think they have been developing over time out of this adaptation of different political interests and different needs from different players, like hospitals being different than small GPs, for example. Also, the regulation and directives have been formed in a similar way. And then they're having these overlaps, they're having these contradictions, and they're having these gaps. And I think the biggest gaps are that you're not linking, so you apply to all the regulations and have the highest quality, but that doesn't come with a financial incentive. You're not being rewarded for, you know, you fulfilling, you're ticking all the boxes, but doesn't help you at all of making this a business, right? And also ticking all the boxes is highly disconnected from, for example, patient reported outcomes, right? So it's more important to stick to the, you know, official quality regulations rather than to actually providing value to the patient and, you know, having that being measured in whatever forms. And so I think this is, for me at least, the two biggest disconnects.
And if you maybe interpret it even more broadly, you can probably say what's the difference between what more probably the regulation body wants to achieve and what's actually then happening due to the regulation. That's at least a discussion that I've heard quite a lot on software as a medical device. I think it's just extremely hard to define on a piece of paper how to ensure quality in software development. So that's something that I would like to add. So even if you have the smartest people in the world trying to write down what is the regulation on actually to ensure that there's nothing going wrong with medical data, I think it's really, really hard to put this in paper, especially in a process that's as fast-lived as software development. So if you're defining a process, but in the end, the result on the quality is really, really hard to gauge. And I think that's probably also a thing why you have a gap between what probably the regulation body wants to ensure and what's happening in reality.
Yeah. On this note, thank you very much to you, Dorian, and to you, Vincent. You guys really a huge breadth of knowledge. Thank you very much also to the participants who listened and asked questions. We have reached 8 o'clock, and I know everyone's busy, wants to get back to their home office life. I won't keep you much longer. Thank you very much for joining. It was really insightful. Thank you also much for listening. Stay healthy and stay happy.
Thank you very much.
Big one to the end. Thank you for having us. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you.